A few thoughts on Mastering Witchcraft by Paul Huson. It begins, well, the introduction is a fairly in-depth origin story, and he talks about the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim, ancient people of Britain, gods and goddesses. And he seems to suggest that the original people of Britain, who he calls the Prytani or Prytani, I really don't know the correct pronunciation, were Fae. Now I've read and reread these passages and I'm still not entirely sure that I've got that interpretation right. He carries on through the centuries and he talks about John Dee. He covers the Star Temple of Glastonbury and the Enochian language, which he says is the lost language of the Nephilim. In the first chapter, he gives an instruction to the neophyte to say the Lord's Prayer backwards. I've come across this with additional instructions to perform that whilst walking backwards around a church. And obviously the intent here is to really impress the subconscious, to rid oneself of any religious programming that is in existence. And it would be a fairly powerful message to the deep mind, certainly, and also a pledge to a new path. I'm not sure I particularly agree with that idea, but it's certainly interesting. He goes on to describe the witch's pyramid as being the 4 cornerstones of a successful practice. And he advocates, and here I quote, virulent imagination, a will of fire, rock-hard faith, and a flair for secrecy. He does explain these qualities with a lot of humour. He talks about deities and spirits and other entities that we press into service for spell work and ritual. And he questions whether they predate man or have been created by man. And that's a really interesting thought stream. I don't believe he goes on to explore that in any great depth, as I recall. He then tackles magical timing, seasons, and the importance of a magical name. He goes into quite a lot of detail about tools and their consecration, with instructions and rites. It's extremely detailed at this point, and I think you'd need no other instruction. He does make use of runic symbols, but there is a lack of information here, and I believe he's taken quite a lot from Solomonic grimoires. Detailed instructions for circle casting and divination also follow. And he does advise using the square of Mercury in all divination, which is a really good idea. Also, the pentacle, which he advocates wearing for even the most, I think he says, rudimentary magical practice. There are some very complex rituals, especially for counter magic and malefica, and he does give dire warnings about the latter. The last part of the book is mostly given over to coven work, which is really interesting and useful for any coven or anyone thinking of beginning a coven. And in general, it's just a magnificent read. Whether it's entirely true, well, that's always up for debate, isn't it? But yes, it's a must read. For myself, I first read Mastering Witchcraft when I was in my teens. Goodness knows where I got it from, because my family were incredibly conservative and would have probably had a blue fit if they'd known I was reading it. So I'm guessing it must have been a library acquisition. And I have since read it more recently, but I still don't have an actual copy, which I must remedy because I think it's an absolute must-have. It's a lot of fun. It's mysterious. It's got everything really that a book on witchcraft should have, and it has that aura of mystery and otherworldliness about it. Wonderful book.